All right, today is December 1st. It's 1 o'clock p.m. or just a little after 1 o'clock, and this is our weekly writing, reasoning, and rhetoric class. Last time we had class was 2 weeks ago, just before Thanksgiving break, and today we're going to focus on writing. We're going to talk about writing because that's really what this is about. This is really intended to be a writing class. Reasoning and rhetoric, we're going to talk about just to help us become better writers, but I'd like to talk about excuse me, I'd like to talk about writing today because ultimately with education, if you say, well, I don't really care about writing. I just want to I just want to get done my high school diploma and, go find some job somewhere. Well, then there's no reason for you to even study writing, really. I want to talk to the students who plan on going to college or would like to do academic work, write in the future, get into writing and so on, because writing is basically a profession. And no matter what you do, the way that smart people communicate is through writing. And I'm going to explain why that is today. But, to get into intelligent society, to get into academic society, to get into society with people who take study seriously, you've got to learn to write well, and you've got to learn to read well. So that's what it means to be literate, really. And we've got to move from like all of the basic popular forms of information like social media and videos and all that kind of stuff, text messaging, that's all like the common people way of communicating. If you want to get into educated society and do academic work or professional work, you've got to learn how to write professionally or academically, and it takes a lot of work. So I'm going to talk to you today about how you can do that, and how you can use your classes and how we can work together so I can help you do that, because I really want to help as many of you as are interested. I want to help you become good writers because it's very difficult. It takes a lot of practice. You need help, and this is the time to get started learning, especially for those of you who are teenagers. You really have to develop good habits and learn to write well, and then get a lot of practice, because by the time you're 18 or so, you've got to already know how to do it. You've got to learn how to write well. You've got to have practice. You've got to be able to do it well, and you've got to be able to do it quickly. So the only way you can do that is by getting practice when you're younger. Most kids wait until it's too late, like they have to write an SAT essay or a college admission essay, and it's like the first time they've written. And that's very common, and we have to make sure that that's not true for any of you. So what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look at one of our composition lessons, which some of you have already seen because you're past this, but I want to dig into it a little bit. In the English composition course, which I recommend to all of you, if you're not enrolled in the English composition course, you need to get enrolled in that course. So please do enroll in that course because it's really great. And what's great about it is that it gives you tons and tons of practice writing, which is really important. It gives you great lessons, little by little, one topic at a time, on how to improve your writing, teaches you how to think about writing, but most importantly, it gives you hundreds of writing exercises to work on that are really important. So I recommend you get into this English composition course because it's a great course. I want to look at lesson 8 today, which is, the first 6 or 7 lessons, they're really introductory. They talk about some basic things, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. But I want to focus on lesson 8 because that's where we really get into writing in English composition in that course. You'll notice in the course, we use the word theme. And the word theme is just a word that's used to describe any kind of writing exercise. All right. Any writing exercise is called a theme. In order to become good at writing, you have to write. It's just, it's just that simple. So there's got to be a commitment on your part where you've got to take time, you've got to develop habits and build a culture in your life where you get used to writing a lot. And you have to ask, well, where can I do that? How can I do that? The first place you need to learn to write is you need to establish some kind of journal or something, where just private writing where you write down thoughts, you write your plans for the day, a summary of your day. um, Anytime there's a question or a decision you have to make, you sort of write out your thoughts in your journal. It's just a place where you think and write in your journal. The word journal, what it means is, there's another word for a journal called a day book. It's a book that you just write in day to day. And you'll actually feel that you have a need to talk about things with other people. This is why people use social media. They get on Facebook, they get on Twitter, they get on all these different social media channels, or they get on text chat, or even like the student forum is another example. You'll just feel that there's a need to talk about things. There's a need to chat about things. Even if you look at the chat from the beginning of this class meeting, you'll see, like, one student says, "Oh, I'm doing this." Another student says, "I just did this." We have a desire to share thoughts and experiences and talk about things. And the problem is, there's a good place to share that, and then there's a bad place to share that. Lazy people will just gossip. They just kind of lazily talk about things. They just blab with really no thinking. They like social media channels because there's just a lot of dumb, lazy stuff there. You can scroll through it. It's all this like dead brain stuff that doesn't require any thought, just people sharing anything that comes up in their head. That's like the communication of the common people, of the uneducated people. And we've got to move beyond that. And that's why journaling is a little more serious, because you're not just blabbing all kinds of random information anytime it pops in your head. There are some things that you need to just keep to yourself that aren't really important. You have to have self-control and realize that it's okay to have a thought and not broadcast it, right? But there's a lot of things that you have in your head that you need to write about and think about. They need to come out. They need to be written. Sometimes you can get stressed and anxious because you've got all kinds of thoughts and worries and ideas in your head, and they're like trapped in there, and it makes you feel nervous and stressed and confused. And you'll find that just by writing them out, you can think through them, work them out, and sort of get them out of your head and put them on a piece of paper, or on a blog. Blogs can be private, so it can be a private journal, but you've got to get them out. And it's good to write, it's good to think, it's good to just jot things down and sort of let your thoughts go and think through things. And you've got to learn to do that. So there's a difference between intelligent culture and ignorant culture, common people culture and educated people culture. So a journal is a good place to start. Private, write out your thoughts. You've got a decision to make. Write out, all the details of the decision. What's confusing. What do you need to figure out? What questions do you have? What are you not certain of? Just write it all out. You'll feel that it feels good to just get that out and think through it. And a lot of times you'll see all the anxiety and confusion goes away if you just write it out. So journaling is a good place. Plus, if you've got questions in life, decisions you need to make, things you're not certain about, like kids ask about their vocation, what should I do? You should be writing about that stuff. You should be writing privately about that stuff, writing your questions, writing things you learn. You come across a good quote or something you find helpful, you should write it down and keep it. But you've got to learn to journal, to have a place where you think and you answer questions, write about things that you're not comfortable talking to other people. Like you've got a really private, personal question that you have to figure out, or something that's troubling you. You don't want to go downstairs and just blab it at the dinner table. A journal is a proper place for those thoughts, right? To keep that kind of stuff private, but at the same time, write it out, get it out of your system, get it onto paper or into a computer file or something like that. You've got to learn to journal. It's good just to tease out your thoughts and write and think, but you need to do it privately, okay? Everything doesn't need to be public. You don't need to be a gossip who talks about, every single detail of life, much of which is inappropriate for public conversation, okay? So that's the first thing. But, to go further, you've got to be willing to write in a public sphere, right? With a purpose, right? To try to teach people, to solve problems, to answer questions. Um, you've got to be willing to write publicly, and doing that takes some guts. You've got to have some courage, but you also have to have humility, because pride keeps people from writing. Pride is one of those vices that has all kinds of bad effects in our lives, and it causes many kids to not write because they're embarrassed that what they write when they're getting started is not going to be very good. So they're afraid to write. They'll write something, they're afraid to share it. That's pride. The only way you're going to get better is by writing and presenting your writing to others and getting feedback, right? You have to get feedback from other people on your writing, and your writing is going to stink when you get started. You're not going to be a good writer. And so there's an obstacle that you have to get over. The first obstacle is pride. You've got to get over pride, and you've got to be willing to write, present your writing to others, and see the feedback that you get, because that feedback is important. And what I did is I took a few minutes to go through the Bible and just pull a few verses that I want to share. This is a proverb. If you look at Proverbs 27, we read, "Let another man praise you and not your own mouth. Let a stranger praise you and not your own lips." This is what I mean by humility, right? Often, just about everybody thinks they're smart. They all think they're brilliant. They think all their opinions are amazing. And if they write something or say something and they get bad feedback, they'll say, these people, they're all stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. And they literally praise themselves and tell themselves how smart they are. And they think that everybody else is dumb and wrong. And no matter what anyone says, the only person who praises them, the only person telling them that they're smart, the only person telling them that they're amazing is themselves. And that's pride, right? So this proverb here, "Let another praise thee and not thy own mouth, a stranger and not thy own lips." That should be the goal for writing, okay? To write something and not tell yourself how great it is. I wrote this poem. Oh, no, it's amazing. No, let other people tell you your poem is amazing. Let other people tell you that your opinion or your argument is amazing. Let another praise you and not your own mouth. That's the goal. That should be your goal in writing. And it's true for anything. It's true for work you do. You do a drawing, if you like to draw, let others tell you that your drawing is nice. Don't sit around telling yourself how nice your drawings are. That's for other people to judge, not you yourself. And this is really bad in America because we look at politicians who run for office, and what do? They spend the whole time just praising themselves, right? So you have this spirit of politics that's very ugly. And then you've got advertising, where people advertise themselves and they praise their own business and they praise their own company, praise their own work and things like that. That's not how it's supposed to work. You need to present your work to others and realize that their feedback is true. Their feedback is real, right? If they tell you, you're terrible at writing, that they're probably right. Even if you say, well, that's just your opinion. Yeah, that's just their opinion, but they're a reader. And that's what writing is for, right? Writing is for readers. Just like if a teacher teaches and the students say, oh, that teacher is terrible. It's probably true, because the purpose of teaching is to influence students. And if the students hate the teacher's probably not a good teacher. So we have to learn to let other people's judgment in these things, not that they're right about everything, right? They could be wrong about their opinion, but their feedback is still valuable. It's still true to some degree. So pride keeps us from writing and making our writing public, because we don't want to hear other people's feedback. And you've got to get over that. It takes humility to become a writer. So that's the first thing. And then the other quotes I have on this page, what I want you to see, there's a bunch of passages from sacred scripture, and they all have something in common. Okay, they all have something in common. First, St. James in the New Testament says, "Be swift to hear and slow to speak." Be swift to hear and slow to speak. In other words, we should be studying and thinking and deliberating on things. We should be reading, listening, learning what other people say, gathering information, researching, and so on. And we should be slow to actually speak. And that would include writing as well. To be swift to hear, to learn, to listen, to gather information, to research, and slow to speak. And you can just think about, probably your own behavior. We tend to do it the other way around, right? We tend to be swift to speak. We're already babbling about stuff before we've even read about it, before we've studied it, before we've researched it at all. And that's bad. That's a bad habit, right? That's bad morals. We should be slow to speak. We should assume we don't know things, and we should do the work that's necessary to gather the information, to solve the problems, to answer the questions, to get the evidence, and so on. So that's a simple moral principle. Be swift to hear and slow to speak. And you see, common culture, common people culture is the opposite. They're just babbling all the time, studying nothing, not reading, not researching, not gathering evidence, not developing arguments. It's just opinion, 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 just all idle, thoughtless babble. And we've got to get out of that culture. Okay, so that's the first thing. Be swift to hear and slow to speak. Then the second passage is taken from the book of Ecclesiastes, which was written by Solomon. And Solomon is said to be one of the wisest men who ever lived in the history of the world. And so we imagine, well, he was so wise, he probably just like sat down and just wrote stuff, and it was all brilliant because he was wise. But if we read what the scripture teaches us, that's not true. That's not true. Solomon was very wise, it says. Solomon was very wise. He taught the people. How did he do that? Seeking out, right? That phrase, seeking out, meant that he studied. He worked and studied to seek out wisdom. He didn't just sit there and wake up and, like the scarecrow, in the scarecrow, just starts thinking out loud in The Wizard of Oz, and he just starts rambling the Pythagorean theorem and stuff. That's not how Solomon's wisdom worked. He didn't just, get blessed by the wizard and all of a sudden he just started randomly talking wisdom. No, Solomon was wise, but he was wise as a result of working. He sought out and set forth many parables or proverbs. So the writing of the proverbs that he did was real work. He studied and worked to prepare the proverbs. He sought profitable words. He didn't just babble, whatever came to his mind. He sought out profitable words. He sought words that would be most effective. And he wrote words that were most right and full of truth. And what I want you to see here is that the process of writing and teaching, it's work. It's a commitment to work for other people. It's not a gift. People don't just sit down and write. J.R. Tolkien didn't just sit down and start writing stuff and Lord of the Rings came out, and it's like, wow, that's pretty good. We should probably publish that. No, he worked on that for years and years and years. That's his like full-time attention and constant work. Even Solomon, as wise as he was, had to work. He sought out and set forth the proverbs. He sought profitable words, and he wrote words that were most right and full of truth. But it was the result of hard work. In the book of Sirach, we read, the author of the book of Sirach says, I have meditated and thought on these things and left them in writing. So again, we don't have this idea that I just sat down and wrote some thoughts. No, I meditated. That means I thought on them and reflected on them and studied them. And he goes on and repeats, and I thought on these things and I left them in writing. And it's an example of what it means to be swift to hear and slow to speak. Swift to hear means I sought out profitable words. I meditated and thought on things, and then I was slow to speak. I left them in writing. I wrote them carefully, sought out good words, wrote it, rewrote it, corrected it, and so on. It's moral. It's a moral work, this work of studying and meditating and writing. St. Luke in the Gospel, this is at the beginning of the Gospel of St. Luke. St. Luke writes, it seemed good to me, having diligently attained to all things from the beginning. In other words, having researched this thoroughly, that's what he says here. It seemed good to me, Saint Luke, the author of the gospel, one of the friends of the apostles. He wasn't an apostle. He was one of Saint Paul's companions. He says, having diligently attained to all things from the beginning, having researched everything carefully, I then wrote it in order. I organized it all, did all the work of setting the whole life of Jesus and his teachings into order. I did the work, the writer. I did the work. I researched it. I set it all out in order for you so that you may know the truth of the words in which you have been instructed. So what I want you to see is in all of these verses, you see the real spirit and work of what writing is for. Writing is a work of charity that's done for other people. Teaching is a work of mercy. Writing is a way of helping people. The person who writes studies, meditates, researches, gathers information, answers the questions, solves the problems, figures out what's wrong with other views and things like that, and then carefully writes it all out in the clearest and most orderly way possible, and then presents that writing to others as a way of helping them. All of the writing is done, all of the work, is done by the writer. It's a charitable work that's done for other people. And that's what should motivate us to want to be writers. We should want to be people who solve problems, who answer questions, who can teach, who can help other people, no matter what it is, whether you're writing a theological article, right, explaining religion to someone, or whether you're writing instructions or driving directions to tell someone how to get somewhere. Not that anybody does that anymore, but you get what I'm saying. If somebody asks you for a recipe and they want instructions how to make something, making the effort to give them instructions that are easy to follow. You see that work of thinking and preparing and writing, making it as clear as possible, as helpful as possible. It's a charitable work that's done through writing. It's a work of mercy that's done through teaching. And so you've got to understand the spirit of a writer. It's not just a person who sits down and blabs and just expresses himself. That's not what writing is about. Writing is for the reader. The writer does the work and the reader gets the benefits. And normally, people who are good at that work, people who are good at writing, are appreciated by the readers, and the readers pay them or give them some kind of reward out of gratitude for the work that they do. And that's how people make a living through writing, by making themselves helpful and useful to others and being rewarded for it. Okay, so that's the work of writing. It's a moral work based on that principle: be swift to hear, be swift to hear and slow to speak. All right, so in our composition class, that's really what it's teaching us to do. It's teaching us how this process of writing works. And so we read in this lesson, and this is really important: just as one learns to skate by skating, one learns to write by writing. That's just the bottom line. If you want to become a good writer, you've got to write. And people who study, people who work to understand the truth, people who work to solve problems and answer questions, they all are writers, because writing is part of the process. That's why colleges, when they want to identify the best students, they ask students to write, because that reveals everything about the student. They want to see how the student writes, and they can tell very quickly, is this a student who writes all the time? Is this a student who's used to writing out her thoughts, writing out answers to questions, thinking through problems? Because when we give that student an assignment to write an essay on a topic, that student's like, oh, yeah, I can do this. Give me a few minutes. I do this all the time. And she can write an orderly, clear, thoughtful, persuasive essay. It reveals to the college the kind of student that the child is. That's why they ask you to write something. they're not interested. I mean, they ask you to write like a personal statement, like what would you like to achieve? What are you, they really don't care about your plans and goals. They're looking to simply see whether you have the ability to communicate in a way that shows that you do that kind of work all the time, that you're not, this lazy kid who just lives on social media and video games and text chatting, with all of this little itty bitty baby language. You're actually a thoughtful, reasonable, carefully studying, mature person that's working to become useful and helpful to others. That's why they ask you to write. All right. So we learn to write by writing. People who think, people who solve problems, people who answer questions, people who want to live well, people who want to make good decisions, they write. That's why they become good writers. They write. So it kind of works the other way around. It's not that if you want to be a good writer, you need to spend a lot of time writing. The reality is people who spend a lot of time writing, they're the kind of people who become good writers. Okay. That's really how it works. But writing comes at the end. It's studying, reading, researching, learning, talking to people, getting information, paying attention to things that go on, and then bringing all of that into your meditation and problem solving, and then writing and thinking through all of the different topics and all of the questions, making things as clear as possible, thinking of helpful illustrations for people, thinking of good examples of things. That's really what people do who become good writers. So it's an unselfish work. It's a charitable work. It's a generous work, a merciful work. And it takes a certain kind of person to actually want to do that work. So writing really is a virtuous activity because it takes a good person to be a good writer. So we go on in this lesson. It says, since the clear expression of thought is one of the essential characteristics of every theme. Theme correction should be directed to this end. Now, what this shows us is that there's basically three parts to writing. There's preparing to write, writing, and then there's correcting writing or rewriting. Okay, some people say pre-writing, writing, and rewriting, but there's three steps. Every day of your life, you're already engaged in the pre-writing process. All of your studies, all of your activities, the habits you choose, the hobbies you choose, everything you choose to do is either contributing to your ability to write and answer questions and solve problems, or it's just wasted time. So you've got to look at the things you do and ask yourself, are these things going to help me become a good writer? Are these things going to help me do better the things that I need to do as an adult, or are these things really wastes of time? So that your whole life is part of the pre-writing process. All of your studies, what you know, what subjects you're familiar with, what books you read, they're all contributing to your ability to be a writer. You're either choosing to read dumb books, just lazy, entertaining nonsense that's really not going to help anything, or you're challenging yourself to read things that introduce you to new ideas, explain complicated ideas, introduce illustrations and examples of things like Aesop's fables. Aesop's fables is a supply of endless examples and illustrations for future writing. That's why it's good to study it. Something like Shakespeare. Shakespeare's famous because he provides so many beautiful quotes and he expresses things so well. And a person who studies Shakespeare has a collection of all of these quotes and great expressions that they can then use in their own writing. So you're either working to collect and gather stuff for your future writing, or you're just, idly entertaining yourself and wasting time. So your whole life is part of the pre-writing process. When it's time to actually write, like I said, there's personal writing, like writing in a journal and things like that, or writing letters to people. I mean, you can choose to write like a dodo and just write like, text message quality stuff. Some people send me emails and you can see that they spend so much time text messaging that they don't even know how to write a real message. They write an email as if it's a text message chat, you know. They're not developing the ability to write in a more serious conversation. That becomes the problem. When you write to someone, you can choose to write like a dodo, like, you know, dopey text chat language, or to actually write a nice message and be thoughtful about it. Write it, reread it, make corrections, improve it. You can choose to make your emails nice to read and helpful, or just, you know, blast some stuff into the thing and hit send in 30 seconds. That's a personal commitment to thinking about the reader. It's the golden rule, doing to others what you would like others to do to you. You can practice writing every single day in all of these different ways. Okay. My daughter, I have a teenage daughter, and she yells at me because when I text message her, I always use good punctuation. You know, she'll yell at me like, Dad, you don't need to use punctuation in a text message, right? But it's just a habit, you know, like if I don't put a semicolon in the middle of two phrases, you know, I don't want to send it because it's not right. I want to put the punctuation in and stuff like that. It's just a habit from wanting to be a good writer. But you can see that how you've just got this kind of lazy, silly, messy text message stuff, like no capitalization. Words are all abbreviated. Like instead of writing because, you write cuz, and there's all these like, okay, that's fine. You know, you're chit-chatting with your friend, but you better know how to communicate, you know, more intelligently than that when it's time to write an email or write an essay or something. And you might not believe it, but there are kids who write like that in college essays. There are kids who write like that when it's time to write an essay for the SAT. You may not believe it, but it's true. They really can't understand how to communicate other than that dopey stuff that they do every day, because they don't challenge themselves to do better. It's a personal commitment to write more thoughtfully and maturely and, you know, grammatically and so on. And if you don't practice it when it's time to do it, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's the problem with that stuff. So you've got to challenge yourself. But writing is when you actually sit down and address the question or the topic or the goal, whatever it is that you need to write, and you ask yourself, how can I give the person who's going to read this the best possible writing? How can I give them the best help? And you can see, you can't just start writing to do that. You've got to think, you've got to plan it, you've got to think about the person or the people you're writing to. You can give an example that's a good example to you, but other people might not understand that example. So it's a bad example. And you can see how that arrogant spirit's like, what do you know? Right? It's a good example. No, it was not a good example because the other people didn't understand it. So you've got to get outside of yourself to be a good writer and write for other people. And that's the challenge. And that takes a lot of work. So it's going to take a lot of work to write the first time, but you're not done, because once you get through that first writing, that's called a rough draft. You're not finished. You've now got to go through it again, and you've got to ask yourself, can I make it better? Can I make it clearer? That's what this lesson just said. The clear expression of thought is one of the essential characteristics of every theme. Can I make it clearer? Sometimes, you know, I can say this from personal experience. You can write out a whole essay, let's say, and you get to the end of the essay and you said, well, that was pretty good, but you know what? As I wrote that essay, I kind of persuaded myself that I'm not right. So I need to rewrite the whole thing because I think the other position is actually better. Sometimes writing becomes the way that we think through a problem or think through a question. And we find that the essay that we've written is just nothing like what we need to actually write to finish. And that first essay gets thrown out and we start all over again. But that first essay was helpful. That was a part of the writing process. And so now we go into the rewriting process and it gets better and better and better. And you just see it's a lot of work that considers the truth in answering the questions. It considers clarity in explaining things as well as possible. And then it also considers the reader and whether what I'm writing is the best thing I can possibly write. for the person who's going to read my work. So it's a lot of work to write. It's a lot of work. You can't sit down and do it. And the reason why I say that, I don't say that to intimidate you and make you feel like, oh, I can't do it. It's a lot of work. I think that message actually has the opposite effect, because what it tells you is good writers don't have, it's not because they have gifts that you don't have and you're just a bad writer. That's not true. I think when you understand that it takes work, when you sit down and try to do it and find it difficult, if you know it's hard, if you know it really is difficult and it takes a lot of work, that's actually encouraging, because you realize that when you find it difficult, there's not something wrong with you. That's just the reality of writing. There's not something wrong with you. You're not a bad writer. You don't have some kind of learning disability. It's hard work. It's hard work for everybody, even for the best writers. Even for me, I'm 48 years old. I have to write articles and essays. I don't just sit down and write stuff and it's easy. I write it and then I rewrite it. Half the things I write, I delete and throw away and just start from scratch. It's hard work. It's where we figure out our answer to the questions, our solution to the problems, and it takes time. So don't be discouraged if you find it difficult. It is difficult. It's real work. That's why people get paid for it, because it's real work. So I think that learning that writing is difficult is actually comforting, because I realize that when I find it difficult, it's not because something's wrong with me. It's just because it is difficult. All right. So the goal is clear expression. The first step, pre-writing, doesn't start when you sit down to write something. Pre-writing, you're working on that every day. What you're doing, who you're talking to, what movies you watch, what books you read, what courses you study, how much you study, how you use your time, all those sorts of things. You're already immersed in future pre-writing activity by your own education and culture. When you write to someone, whether you try to write grammatically and follow the rules that you learn in grammar class, or just ignore them and just write gibberish, making your education pointless, that's all part of the pre-writing process. You're either taking advantage of those opportunities or you're wasting those opportunities. And then when it's time to write, you're either caught by surprise and not prepared, or ready for it because you've already been working on these things in a number of different ways. Okay. So the writing process is difficult. We also have to rewrite and correct our writing. And in this book, in this composition lesson, we learn that when you're in school, you have some advantage because you've got teachers that can help you with your writing. They can point out problems you have. They can show you bad habits you have. They can correct things that you might not even realize. And this is true for me too. I'm in classes myself, and I have professors that will make corrections in my writing. And I'll say, wow, I never thought of that before. I write in a certain way or express something in a certain way. And my professor will say, that's not really very clear. And I'll think about it and say, yeah, I never even thought about that. So it's helpful while you're in school to take advantage of the opportunity you have to write and get feedback from a teacher, or from even from your peers, from others, even if they're not good writers themselves. They might just say, like, that's not clear. I really don't understand what you're talking about. And you get those warnings that you need to be more careful. So you've got to take advantage of this opportunity while you're studying and have teachers and peers to help you with your writing before you have to write something important and find yourself not prepared. Now, I mentioned before that a week or so ago, I sent out a message that said, if you submit to me written assignments in Google Docs, right? If you submit to me written assignments in Google Docs, and it doesn't matter whether it's comprehension questions for an assignment, outlines, themes, whatever. If you submit them using the assignment thing and you just like type your answers in, I can give you a score, but there's no way I can correct it. I can't give you any comments. There's just no way to do it. It doesn't work like that. It's really just meant to allow the teacher to give a score. If you want me to read through your writing and really mark it up and give you feedback and comments on every single question and on the details of your writing, you need to do your assignments in a Google Doc. and then get a link for the Google Doc. And then when you submit your assignment, just paste the link to your Google Doc in the assignment box. Okay, then when I sit down to grade and I open your assignment, there's not going to be answers. It's just going to be a link. And when I click on that link, I'll open your document. Make sure you share it with me. I'll open your document and I'll download it onto my tablet as a PDF file. And then I can write on it with my pen on my tablet. So I can just, mark it up, write all over it, give you feedback, give you lots of comments and corrections. And you can use me to help you, find your faults and write better. Okay. So if you're willing to do your assignment in a certain way and submit it to me in a certain way, it allows me to help you more. Okay. So that's up to you. But you've got to be able to do it in a Google Doc and submit it to me. Or, even to put it, you've got to get it to me so that I can get it in a PDF form. So if you like to use Microsoft Word instead of Google Docs, you can do it in Microsoft Word and then just save it as a PDF and give me a link to the PDF. So the bottom line is if you do your work in a document like that and give me a link so that I can get a PDF, I can give you much more feedback. And I don't do that for every student. I'm only doing it for two groups of students. I'm doing it for students who are premium students, and I'm doing it for students who attend these live classes. So you're the only students who get to do that. But if you do the work in the Google Doc, send me a link to your Google Doc, I'll give you a lot more feedback, okay? So all these themes and stuff like that, write them out in a Google Doc, send me the link, and that will allow me to give you a lot more feedback, okay? And just so you know, the grading assistants, I've told all of them that if any student submits a Google Doc, they're not allowed to grade those assignments. So you're not going to get some, one of my sons giving you comments on your paper. That's not their job, okay? Their job is to do simple grading. Anything you send in the form of a document with a link, I'll be the only person who grades that, okay? So that's a way that I can help you, but you've got to be willing to do the assignment in a certain way. Now, some of you might say, well, I don't have an account. I don't know how to do this. In the classical liberal art, we can give you a Google email and a Google account because we have them as a school. We can give them to students and it's free. So you don't have to do anything. If you need an account to do that, you want to save all your documents and all that kind of stuff, just let us know and we can give you a CLAA email account and Google account so you can do all that stuff. If you already have a Gmail account or Google, you don't need one, but if you want one, just ask because it's free. But that's how I would recommend you do these assignments. Anything you write, whether, like I said, comprehension questions, just regular writing assignments for lessons, themes. If you submit them to me in a Google Doc, I'll give you a lot more feedback. Okay, that's my deal. And just to show you that feedback, this is what it'll look like. So I'll get your document like this as a PDF, however hopefully you'll format it decently, but I'll get it like this and you can just see that I just write on it like a piece of paper, so I can mark up your individual answers. I can put little abbreviations for problems that you have that you need to work on. I'll circle questions that, you didn't answer them exactly right. It needs a little more work. I'll put an X on questions that you just have no clue what you're talking about. I'll put a check mark when it looks good. So I can give you feedback on every single answer if you submit your work like this, okay? It'll be much more helpful to you because you know what it's like. You get a 75 on an assignment and you're like, okay, well, there were 22 questions, what do I do, right? Do I just go back to the drawing board and start over again? Well, sometimes that's all we can do to help with grading. We can just tell you there's some things you need to look at and we can give you some general recommendations. But if you want more detailed feedback, submit your assignments like this, okay? Just give me a link to a document. Now, you'll see all these abbreviations and stuff, and on the Help Center, there's an article titled, "What Do Handwritten Grading Marks Mean?" Very, very creatively titled here. What do the handwritten grading marks mean? And it's an explanation of all different abbreviations that I'll use when I mark your papers, so you know exactly what I'm saying, okay? So you can just look at the grading and then say, you know, Mr. Michael wrote, you know, FRM on one of my questions. What does that mean? It means use better formatting to help your reader, right? Make your writing easier to read by formatting it more nicely. Okay, that's part of writing. So I'll just use those abbreviations. You can see them on here. You can see I wrote CAP, I wrote CS for complete sentences, I wrote SRC because you need to identify the source of where you got that information from. So I'll give you detailed feedback, and the more you write and the more work you do, the more feedback you'll get, and you'll start to recognize what your problems are. Like, what do you always get wrong? What comments do I always make on your writing? You'll start to realize what your faults are, what your bad habits are, and you can start to focus on those things, okay? So that's why it's helpful. But if you're willing to give me the assignments in the form of Google Docs, I'll give you more detailed feedback, writing by hand, okay? So that's it. Everything, all the marks I use are explained on this one Help Center article. So you just have to go to classicalliberarts.com/help and then just search, what do handwritten grading marks mean? And you'll find this article, okay? So you've got to write in order to become good at writing. You've got to make use of your teacher while you have access to teachers. You've got to make use of them to get feedback on your writing. That's true of your peers as well. Obviously, I can give you different feedback than you can give each other. The feedback you can give each other is like, that was really good. That part's not clear. I have no idea what you're talking about. That argument doesn't make any sense. Peers can give each other that kind of feedback, right? This is really boring. That was really fun to read. That was really easy to read. That illustration was really good. That illustration doesn't make sense. That's the kind of feedback peers can give each other. But as far as the technical stuff, getting into grammar and writing skills, that's the stuff that you should look to a teacher for, okay? And I'll give you it as long as you submit your assignments in the right way, okay? So that's what I wanted to talk about. A couple things. In order to become a good writer, you need to not only write well, but you need to live well. You need to really make a commitment to being an intelligent person, right? And it's everything you do contributes to that or takes away from it. So like we talked about this in other talks, you'll say like, hey, Mr. Michael, is it okay to do this? And I'll say, well, you know, it's not illegal to do that, but I don't think it's the best thing, right? You should be asking the question, what's the best thing to do, right? What's the best thing? That's the question you should be asking. And you should be thinking ahead. You're going to have to write important essays. You're going to have to do important writing assignments. Now's the time to prepare for those things. You can't just blow your childhood and waste it and say, yeah, when I get there, I'll take care of that one. No, you won't. It'll be too late. You know, this is the time for you to prepare for those things. And when you're 18, 19, our society starts rewarding the people who worked during their childhood. It doesn't start when you're 25 years old. Our society starts rewarding kids when they're 18. There are kids getting scholarships where they're getting $50,000 scholarships to go to college for work that they did when they were 16 years old. You know, our society rewards young adults for using their childhood responsibly. That time is now for you guys to work on these things and think about these things. Our society doesn't ignore teenagers and young adults and start rewarding people when they're 30. There are huge rewards to be earned when you're 18 years old. So you need to take these high school, middle school years seriously and realize that you've got the opportunity to do these things. You've got people willing to help you. It sounds selfish. It sounds selfish to say this, but one virtue you need to develop is you need to learn to use the people around you who can help you. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I don't mean take advantage of them. I mean, when there are good people around you who are willing to help you, you've got to take them up on their offers and make good use of them. You know, your parents pay for you to have access to this course or this program or this tutor or this piano teacher and this person and that. You need to learn to make use of those opportunities. Take advantage of them. That's what they're for, okay? So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I want you to be challenged to become good writers, to realize it's hard work. You're already working on it every day by studying. But you've got to make a conscious effort to ask, how can I make myself better at writing, or any skill, right? Not just writing, any skill. The things you do every day contribute to that or take away from it. All right. I'm going to stop there. Let me stop my recording. And then if there's anything you want to talk about, any questions, we can get into anything as much as you need to. Okay. Let me just turn this off.